Respect for everyone's time this morning, and I know we have until 9:45, so I want to make sure we get through the content in the most efficient way possible. So welcome everybody to this webinar from the National Center on Accessible Educational Materials, or the AIM Center. There are some resources available for you. There is a handout, and the handout has a lot of the resources, and Leslie just included a link to where the location where you can download the handout, as well as these slides from today's presentation. So the short URL is bit.ly, and then /AEM presentations, and that is case sensitive. But the easiest way to get there is to just follow the link that Leslie just shared. That will take you to a Google Drive folder where, again, you will see a handout and the slides. We do have some closed captioning available this morning, so I want to thank Lenore, who's providing the captioning. We really appreciate that. It's a really nice support. If you want to access the captions, what you can do is select the closed caption option in Zoom. You should see that on the Zoom interface, and the captions will appear along the bottom of the screen. So this is a nice support that allows you to follow along with just the audio as well as visually with the captions. And then finally, if you have any questions at any time, make sure that you use the chat to share your questions and comments. Leslie's going to keep an eye on those, and then she'll flag those for me as we go along. What you will need to do, though, to make sure that everybody can see your questions and comments is there's a pull-down menu in the chat. So you'll choose all panelists and attendees, and then that will ensure that everyone can see your comments and questions. So again, a quick reminder, we are recording this webinar, and what we'll do is we'll make the recording available about a week after this presentation. That gives us some time to take the raw captions and then edit them so that we have a accurately captioned presentation. So again, that takes about a week, and we can send out an email once that's ready. So with those housekeeping details out of the way, we'll go ahead and get started with this presentation on creating accessible presentations. How's that for a meta? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn off my video. So you've seen what I look like. I'm going to go ahead and turn off my video just to save some bandwidth and also reduce some distractions. And then you'll just see the slides. So my name is Luis Perez. I'm a technical assistant specialist at the National Center on Accessible Educational Materials. I'm really excited to be doing this presentation for OSEP, and I hope you get a lot out of it. I think presentations is just a kind of a requirement these days. We're all presenting. Even if you're a classroom teacher, you're really presenting quite a bit. So it's important to make sure that we're communicating our ideas and our information in a way that allows everyone to access the information and participate. So typically I have a section here where we talk about the why of accessible presentations and accessibility, but in the interest of time, we're going to go right into some of these best practices. So I'm going to share a number of tips for making your next presentation more accessible and inclusive. However, the full slides that we typically use for this presentation are available in the Google Drive folder that we just shared. So you can access the rest of the slides there. So one piece of advice from Maya Angelou that I've taken on as my personal motto when it comes to accessibility is do the best you can until you know better. Then when you know better, do better. And that just kind of emphasizes how accessibility is something that evolves over time. Not only the field is evolving, but also we are evolving as people that are engaged in this area. So it's important to sort of have a growth mindset that this is something that you will get better over time as you practice more. So, start where you are, and then over time, implement one of these techniques at a time until you get comfortable with it, and then you can move on to the next one. But the idea is to just continuously improve our accessibility practices. And who better to guide us in that than Maya Angelou? So what we're going to do today is we're going to look at a presentation through the lens of a framework called POUR, P-O-U-R. And this framework comes from the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, which are the international standard for accessibility. And basically, whether you're creating a website, a presentation, or a document, these guidelines apply. And those 4 principles, which are the sort of the foundation for the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, are perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. And together they make up POUR. So I have an image here is the end of a pitcher of water, pouring the water into a glass. So I want you to keep that in mind as we go through the presentation. What we want you to do is pour the accessibility into your content, into your documents, into your presentations, which is what we're focusing on today. All right, so let's get started with the first principle from POUR, which is perceivable. So we want to make sure that everyone can see and hear, and in the case of a Braille display, which is something you can connect to a number of devices these days, that they can also touch the content. And so there's a few things we can do to make sure that that's the case. We can add alternative text to our images and other visuals. So that way, if somebody is blind or has a visual impairment, they can still access the information in an alternative way. And we can add closed captions to our videos. We can provide transcripts. That will make sure that the content is accessible to somebody who's deaf or hard of hearing. But also, captions benefit a number of other people. They're a great literacy support. They're a great support for people who speak English as another language. Captions are the way that I learned English. So they've been really helpful to me throughout my life. And then, of course, if the audio is not working, if the speakers are not working, you can always turn on the captions. You've probably seen that at restaurants and busy train stations and so on. And the final one that we're going to focus on is providing sufficient color contrast between the text and its background. And this is one that I often see ignored, but it can have a big impact on how you can focus on the information and the content as opposed to its presentation. But we'll go ahead and get started with just alternative text. And it really depends on which version of the application you're using to create your presentation. There's different steps, but they're all very similar. So I'm going to start with Office 365. We typically start with PowerPoint because Microsoft has done quite a bit to ensure accessibility. And I'll mention that as we go along, but I'm also going to cover Google Docs where it makes sense. So one of the steps you can take whenever you add an image or a visual to your slides is you want to make sure that there's alternative text because screen readers can't actually process an image unless there is that alternative text description. So in Office 365, it's really simple to do this. You'll right-click the image. There's also an option in your ribbon that you can choose once you have the image selected. But the easiest way that I found is to just right-click the image and then select the option that says Edit All Text. And once you do that, it takes you to a pane on the side, or it opens up a pane on the side that has that heading, All Text. And what's really cool in Office 365 is that they're using artificial intelligence now to give you a head start. So one of the options that you'll see is generate a description for me. And that's using computer vision to go through the image and try to recognize some of its key features and provide a description for you. Now, of course, artificial intelligence, it's kind of in its early days. This will get better as time progresses. But for now, you can't really just rely on the AI. You still need to check the descriptions that are provided, but it's a nice head start. It saves you some typing. So you can choose the generate a description for me, and then you can edit that description so that it accurately reflects the image. Now, there are times when you have an image that's just there for decoration, right? It may be something just to add visual appeal to the slides. And so this is something that's brand new in Office 365. It's the ability to mark something as decorative. So if the image is not essential for understanding, right? So it's not adding to the content, it's just there for visual appeal. You can check the box that says mark as decorative. So again, Office 365, really Microsoft has improved the workflow here for adding alt text. It's making it a little bit easier, a little bit more streamlined. Now, if you have an older version of Microsoft Office, so you'll have PowerPoint for Office 2016 and so on. The steps, again, are very similar. It's just there's a few changes in the terminology. So again, the easiest way to do this, you right-click the image, you'll select Format Picture, and then it will take you to another screen where you'll choose the Format Picture option. So that's the blue square with these arrows inside of it pointing out. It's the third one from the left if you're looking at that Format Picture pane. And so you'll choose that option, and then you'll expand the alt text option. And this is really important. You'll notice that there's two options here. There's a title and a description. And what you want to do is put in the alternative text in the description field. And I've highlighted that with an arrow to remind you. And the reason for that is if you're ever to export, if you're ever to export your PowerPoint into PDF, which a lot of people do, then you want to make sure that you are entering in the description field, because that's what's going to be transferred to the PDF. Take a sip of water there. Sorry about that. So again, make sure you're using the description field, not the title one, when you're doing this in older versions of Microsoft Office. So I want to do a quick demo. I always like to show you, not just tell you. So what I'm going to do here is exit out of my slides. And I have an extra slide here that has an image so that you can see what I'm doing. So what I'm going to do is select the image. And with the image selected, I can choose the picture format option. And you'll see that there is an option in here for alt text. So that's the long way to do this. With the image selected, select the picture format tab, and there's the alt text option. But typically, I don't want to go through all the steps. So what I will do is just right-click the image, choose the edit alt text option. And that gives me the alt text pane will open up to the right of my image. And then in here, I can add the alt text. If I can type this morning. So you get the idea. We want to be as descriptive as possible. And then here's the option where you can mark it just below that field where you enter the alt text. There's a checkbox. So if this image were just there for visual appeal, you could check that box. And then that would mean that the image is skipped by a screen reader. So that's what it means to mark it as decorative. The screen reader says, oh, this is not important, I can skip it. Otherwise, you know, if you have an image without alt text, the screen reader might read the file name. And if you're like me, your file names are probably not all that descriptive. You know, JPEG 1535 small will not be that helpful to a screen reader. So we want to make sure that we either have alt text or we mark it as decorative. Either one would work, depending on what the use of the image is. So let me pause there, see if there are any questions for me. You can, again, use the chat. I can see that here. So just let me know if you have any questions. Let me go back to the slideshow here, and I will return to that. Now, if you're using Google Slides, a lot of us use Google Slides because it's a great way to do a collaborative presentation where multiple people can work on it at the same time. The steps for adding the alt text is very similar. You'll right-click the image, you'll choose the alt text option, and then you'll type a description for the image in the description field. So again, you want to make sure it's in the description field, not the title one, because we can export from Google Docs, we can export to PDF, we can export to EPUB, And so when we do that export, we want to make sure that that information is transferred correctly, and the description field will do that for us. The title one may not. So again, the steps, whether you're using the new version of Office, the old version of Office, or Google Docs, they're very similar. It's just the terminology may be a little different. So that it covers how to do it, but probably the biggest question that I get is, how do you know what's a good image description? So in working with educators, I've come up with what I call the 3 C's of image description. And so these are some questions that you can ask yourself as you're entering alt text for an image. So the first is context. Is the image described in the surrounding text? Is it used for purely decorative purposes? So if the response to either one of those questions is yes, then we want to mark that image as decorative. And the reason for that is we don't want to be redundant. So if the image is already described in the rest of the slide, then we don't want to repeat that description. So we could mark that image as decorative. And if the image is there just for visual appeal, again, then that description is just going to slow down a screen reader user. It's not going to really add to their experience that much. So again, this is a judgment call though. So we always try to consider the context and the purpose for using the image when determining what the appropriate alt text is. And then when there is an image that's informative, that's actually meaningful, that adds to the content, then we want to focus on what is the key idea or information that the image conveys. So we're focusing on the content, not the presentation. So for instance, in a STEM presentation, we might say scientists pouring a liquid into a beaker, as opposed to scientists is wearing a white coat. They have short cropped hair and they're wearing blue pants. So all of that is more visual information, but it doesn't actually, it's not actually important to understanding what's happening in that context. And then the final one, the 3 C's, is conciseness. So generally we want to limit our description to about a tweet. And currently Twitter has a 280 character limit. So that's a good guideline. If the image is more complex, then we would need to add a long description. And there's a number of ways we can do that. Probably the best way is to just add a link to another slide where we have a text description of that image. So for instance, if you have a chart or a graphic, that's going to be a more complex image because it's got all kinds of special relationships inside of it. So you could add a short alt text that kind of summarizes the image, right? The general trends and so on. And then right underneath it, you can include a link to another slide where you have a more detailed description of that image. So in addition to alt text, so alt text is probably one of the most important things you can do with your presentations. Because again, screen readers can't really process the image right now. In the future, they'll be able to use computer vision and so on to do that. But right now, we want to make sure that we provide that text alternative. The other thing that I typically see in presentations is a lack of contrast. And this actually harms me personally because I'm a person with a visual impairment myself. So when there's not enough contrast, it makes it a little bit more stressful for me. It takes a lot more effort for me to follow the presentation. So you can see 2 examples here. We have one where there's white text against a yellow background. And so I have an X next to it because there's not enough contrast there. And you're probably experiencing how difficult that is. And then we have an example underneath it where we have black text on a yellow background. And that has a check mark next to it. So that has sufficient contrast. And most of the time, you can kind of give it an eye over, and right away, you'll know if something is lacking contrast. If it takes you a little bit of effort, then that's a good indication. But there are tools that we can use to check for contrast. And in the chat, Leslie has just shared a link to the color contrast analyzer. This is the tool that I use. It's really easy to use. It's just a pane that floats over your screen. You can put it in the corner. You can leave it open all the time. And as you work on your slides, if you're in doubt, as to whether there is sufficient contrast. It gives you 2 eyedroppers, one for the text, one for the background, and then you can check for that contrast. And then the final thing in terms of that first principle and making things perceivable is to make sure that if we're using a video in our presentation, we want to make sure that it has captions. Now that's beyond the scope of this webinar, and given the limited time that we have, I won't be able to show you how to do that, but we do have an excellent resource on the AIM Center website. It's called Teaching with Accessible Video. So there you will find pages on the why of captioning, why it's important. The what has to do with quality of the captions. So we want to make sure that we're not relying on automatically generated captions. Because again, just like the automatically generated alt text, they're not quite there yet in terms of quality. So we want to make sure we have accurate captions that are timed in sync with the audio. And then we also have a page on how to do it. And in that page, we share a free tool called Cadet from the National Center on Accessible Media. I love Cadet because it's really easy to use, and it's also cross-platform. So that's what I use when I'm captioning videos. So we also have a video tutorial that takes you step-by-step on how to use Cadet to create captions. Again, I will point you to that resource for learning more about the captioning of videos that are going to be embedded in a presentation. So let me pause here, see if there are any questions for me in the chat about perceivable. So remember, POUR, we have perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. So these are 4 qualities of an accessible experience. I don't see any questions, but I want to make sure that I am practicing good wait time. So again, if you have any questions, just let us know in the chat. And Leslie just share the link to that Teaching with Accessible Video section of our website. So feel free to check that out. And we also have some tips for how to incorporate video into the learning process. Can you send out examples of how to create longer descriptions of tables and charts? Becca says. Yes, in the handout, we have a link. The Diagram Center has some examples. So they walk you through an image, and then they provide different types of different examples of descriptions. Because again, it depends on the context and the purpose for using that image. So they give you some that are shorter, some that are longer, depending on how the image is going to be used. So that is in the handout. We'll make sure to share that link again before we're done here. But that will give you lots of great examples. And I find that with those complex images, as you do a few of them, you kind of start to see a pattern of how to do them. So even though the image may be different, may have different details, you kind of get this template in your mind, and that helps out a lot to make it easier as you go along. Thanks for that question. I really appreciate it. So any of you, again, feel free to share your questions and comments in the chat. We want to make this as interactive as possible. All right, so perceivable is making sure everyone can see, hear, and in the case of Braille, touch the content. So that's how they perceive the information. The second principle is operable. So how are people going to interact with the content? How are they going to be able to navigate it? And so there's a few things we can do there. We can make sure that we're using unique slide titles so that people know where they are in the presentation if they're using assistive technology. We can make sure that we're using descriptive link text so that the links make sense out of context, because often screen reader users will press a keyboard shortcut or use a gesture that just brings up a list of all the links. And if the links are not meaningful, if they don't make sense without the rest of the slide for context, then you're going to be confused as to what each link refers to. And then probably the most important thing that we want to do for screen reader users is to check the reading order to make sure that it is logical and we're not bouncing around the slide in a random order. So I'm going to show you all of these, so don't worry. And in fact, we have a quick little demo in just a little bit for these. So the first thing is we want to make sure that we have unique slide titles. And the easiest way to check that is there is an outline view in PowerPoint. So if you go to View, the View tab, and you choose Outline View, it's going to show you the outline for your presentation. And each slide is represented by a number, then there's a little square next to it, and then in bold, you would see the slide title. So if you see the number and the little square and no text, then that means that the slide is missing a slide title. So again, the slide title is like a landmark. It helps the screen reader user determine, oh, I'm in the right place. So it's really important to use those slide titles and then to make them unique and meaningful. And then there are benefits for other people. So if you have a learning challenge, you can open the outline view, and it gives you a sense for what the big ideas or the key points of the presentation are. So think about it as an outline for your content. And then to check the reading order, so once we've added a slide title, we want to make sure that it's one of the first things that's read out loud. Again, it's a landmark. So it tells someone who's a screen reader user, I'm in the right place. And so we want to make sure that it's one of the first things that's read out loud. And fortunately, in PowerPoint, there is a selection pane. This is something that Google Docs does not have, unfortunately. So this is unique to PowerPoint. And the selection pane shows you each item on your slide and the order in which they will be read out loud. But here's the trick, and I'm going to say this a couple of times because this is somewhat counterintuitive. It's actually the reverse of what you would expect. So the first thing at the top is not what's read out loud first by a screen reader. It's actually the first thing at the bottom. So the order is reversed from what you expect. So again, the bottom is going to be read first, and then you could think of it as layering. So each thing from there, the next thing on top will be read next, and so on. So in this example, I typically put in my slide numbers first. I want to make sure that the person accessing the presentation has a sense of where they are, and the slide number does a great job of pointing that out. And then I will put the title next. So you'll see that that's the next thing on top of the slide number. And then the rest of the slide elements, I will put those in the desired order. So let's go ahead and show you how to do that. Here we have a slide. It's missing a slide title. So let's go ahead and fix that. I'm going to exit out of my presentation. And what I'm going to do is first go to the View tab. And then I'm going to choose, instead of normal, so normal shows you thumbnails of your slides on the left side of the screen. I'm going to choose the outline view. And that shows me the outline for the presentation. And so right now you'll see that I have slide number 24. There's a little square that shows that's the slide that I'm on. But then there is no text next to that little square, meaning there's no heading or no title. So what I'm going to do is add a slide title. And again, we want to make sure that that's unique. It's not repeated. So we don't use the same slide title a few times in our presentation. Now, that's great. So now we know which slide we're on. That slide title helps us with that. But the next thing we want to do is change the reading order. So what I will do is go to the Home tab, and then I'll choose the Arrange option. And here's the little trick here. You want to make sure you choose the pull-down menu, and then go down to the bottom and choose the Selection pane. And so that will let us see the order of the elements in this slide. So you can see I have the text placeholder, I have the slide number, and then I have the title. So that's the current order. We want to make sure that these are all in the right order. So what I'm going to do is move the slide number to to the bottom, and then the title will come next. And now we have things in the right order. So that's a preferred order for me, at least. I want to make sure first you're in the slide number 24. Then you know that the title is demo slide titles in reading order. And then finally, we have the content for that slide. So you can see the other thing you can do is, for design purposes, you don't want to have the slide title visible, but you still want it to be read out loud to screen readers. You can also hide it. So just by checking the box here, we can do that. We can hide things, but make sure that it's still read out loud. As long as they're listed here in the selection pane, they will be read out loud, but we can also hide them visually if we need to. All right, so let me come back here and we will play from this current slide. Any questions about slide titles? I want to make sure I pause there for a second. This is really important. Again, think about as you're navigating in your favorite city to visit, right? There are these landmarks that help you determine, oh, I'm headed in the right direction. So that's what slide titles do, is they're a good landmark. Great. So again, keep your questions coming as needed. So the next thing, it's kind of a similar concept. With slide titles, we want to make sure that they're unique. The same thing with links. We want to make sure that the links are unique and meaningful. So I don't see this as much anymore, but a lot of times people use click here as the link text. The problem with that, again, is that a lot of times screen reader users will press a keyboard shortcut and they want to get a list of all of the links so that they can choose which one to follow, which resource they want to access. If the links are not meaningful, if they all say click here or learn more, then how would you determine what click here means, right? What does it point to? What's going to happen when I select that link? So here's an example of that. Now let's compare that to the second option here. Oh, jumped ahead too fast. Let's compare that to the second option, where what we've done is we've taken the link text and then make that a little bit more descriptive. So we want to make sure here, when these are listed on the list or appear on the list, right away you can tell which one you want to follow or what will happen when you follow that link. So whether I want to go to the CAST website or the AIM Center website, that's clear when the links are descriptive and meaningful. Now, this I do see a lot. So I don't see the click here, learn more as much anymore, but I still see this a lot, especially as people share long URLs, especially from Google Docs. So the problem when we share the full URL is that after the screen reader gets through the domain name, it starts in most cases to read each character aloud one at a time. So I have a quick demo here for you to show you what that's like, what that experience is like. So let's see if we can play that.
https://docs.google.com/document/d/1stu h25w_score_plsqrnsci57rpl.
Everyone got that? There'll be a quiz on that at the end of the presentation. Just kidding. So again, if it's a short, if you're just sharing the domain name, like, I don't know, osep.org or that .gov, that would be fine. The problem is if you're sharing a document within your website, then that URL may be really long and it may have lots of individual characters. And so that can be not a great experience for somebody listening to the content out loud. So instead of including that full URL, what we would do is take some descriptive text and then make that the link. And you can see when I hover over it, I get a little tooltip that pops up that has the full URL. But again, this is what's going to be read out loud to a screen reader user. Instead of that long URL, we're going to hear poor, perceivable. And that is a much better experience. So we've covered two of the principles of poor: perceivable, right? We want to make sure everybody can access the information. Operable, we want to make sure everyone can navigate the presentation. These last two I'm going to do fairly quickly, but again, there's more information in the handout. So the third principle is understandable. So we want to make sure that people are able to process the information without undue effort on their part. So there's a few tips. I didn't want to overwhelm you with too many of them, but these are the ones that I feel are the ones that have the biggest impact. One is to rely on your themes for consistency. So you'll notice in this presentation, I've only really used two slide layouts, one for the beginning of each section, and then one for each of the slides within that section. So that kind of creates a pattern, and that helps with understanding to see how things are organized. Limit the number of fonts and styles. I will tell you this, italics can be really difficult to understand for people with learning difficulties. So try to limit the use of italics whenever possible. If you want to emphasize something, use bold instead. And then just limit the number of different fonts, because again, that's just adding noise to your presentation. So I typically only use a couple of fonts at most to make sure that we're not adding noise. Be careful with transitions. They can sometimes interfere with screen readers. So you may think that it's really cute to have that swoosh effect on every slide. But that also will get old for the people that are accessing the presentation after like slide 5 or 6. But again, if that transition happens automatically, especially, sometimes it will get in the way of how the screen reader works. And then use plain language. Now you'll know your audience, right? Hopefully. And so you want to choose language that's appropriate for your audience, but as much as possible, use plain language and avoid jargon. And if you are going to use a term that may be unfamiliar, define it. So often in our AIM Center presentations, we'll define accessibility and we'll define universal design for learning, because we don't want to make assumptions that everyone understands what those terms mean. So that's something we do at the beginning of the presentation as a language support for everybody. And then the final concept of poor is robust. And what we want to do is make sure that we're following best practices. And fortunately, there are tools to help us with that. In Microsoft products, you can perform an accessibility check. It's found in the Review tab, and then you'll see an option called Check Accessibility. If you don't see it, you can also search for it. So there's a really nice search feature, and you can search for just accessibility, and it should be one of the first options that pops up. And this is not perfect, of course. It's just like the automatic captions and the automatically generated alt text, right? It's getting better and better all the time, but it's not something we can rely on exclusively. So you want to use it as just a starting point to help you pinpoint what some of the biggest problems are. So it does really well in finding, as this example points out here, missing alt text. So any image where you forgot to include the alt text, it does a great job with that. What it won't do is tell you whether that alt text is appropriate or not. That's more of a judgment call. So again, you can use those 3 C's, right? Context, content, and conciseness to help you work through that image alt text. It will tell you if there's a missing slide title, but again, it won't tell you if it's unique, is it meaningful. So again, use it as a tool. It's a good starting point. It does save you time because it pinpoints where the issues are, and then you can fix those issues and save some time. And what's really nice is below any of these errors, you'll also see information on how to fix the error. So it's a great learning tool as well as you spend more time creating presentations. If you're using Google Slides, there isn't currently a checker, built-in checker, but there is a tool called Grackle. And Grackle is a free add-on. We just share the link in the chat. Unfortunately, it's a freemium tool, so it'll let you do the check and it will find the issues for you. But then if you want information on how to fix them, then you have to pay. And you have to purchase a subscription to it. But again, just for doing that initial check and help you catch things like missing alt text, that can be really helpful. So it's built into Office, and on Google Slides, you can use the Grackle add-on. Then the final tip for making your presentations more robust, and we try to practice this at the AIM Center, is to think about your presentation in two parts. There's what you present, that's your slide deck, and then there's what you share. And this is where you want to include all of your links to resources and all of your takeaways and your key points, and that's the handout. So there's a book that really changed my life in terms of presentations, and I've included a link to it in the handout. It's called Presentation Zen by Gar Reynolds, and he uses the term slideguments. And what he means by a slidegument is that we try to create a slide where really what we have is a document on screen. And when we do that, it has implications for accessibility. If you try to put in too much text into your slide, it often means that the text is going to have to be smaller. And so for a person like me with a visual impairment, that's going to make the text harder to read. Also, if you have all that text on the screen, if somebody has dyslexia or has difficulty processing the content when it's in text form, then they may shut down once they see a slide like that. So Gar Reynolds' philosophy is really to keep things simple. Keep it simple, scientists, right? So the slide is usually going to be just a prompt. It's a way for you to remember what you're going to say, but also for the audience to have sort of an anchor for the content. But it's not where we share all of the information. That's what the handout is for. The slide deck is the key points of the talk. The handout has the resources, and both need to be accessible. So with the handout, again, you want to make sure that you have headings, section headings, so that you're splitting that wall of text into some manageable chunks. Just like I said with the slides here, you want to make sure you're using descriptive links. And then, of course, if you have any images, typically we don't in our handouts. We try to keep them as simple as possible. But if you do have any images, you want to make sure that they have alt text. So we want to make sure both the slide deck and the handout are accessible. And a quick plug, on the AIM Center website, we did an online course this past year on just the basics of AIM, and Module 2 focuses all on presentations and documents. So that's a resource that you can check out on our website. And then we also have a section of our website, Designing for Accessibility with Poor. And so that takes each of the principles that I've covered today, and it breaks them down with links to videos and other resources. So all those step-by-step directions are there for you. So this is a lot of information, but again, we have the handout, we have a recording of this webinar, and we'll make sure to share that. And again, a reminder that it will be ready in about a week. So if there's something that you want to explore in more detail, the recording, you can play me back as many times as you want. You'll probably get tired of my voice after a while, but it will be there for you as a resource. And lastly, I left 1 minute for you to ask your pressing questions that you have for us. So I want to thank Lenore and ACS for providing the captions. Again, we always appreciate your support with making sure that the presentations we do are accessible to as many people as possible. So thank you, Lenore, for that. And then again, if you are being shy this morning, you can also contact us with your questions. So you can email us at aem@cas.org. You can follow us on Twitter. We're at AEM_center. On the Facebook, we are at AEM Center. So lots of different ways to stay up to date with what we're doing at the AIM Center, but also connect with us. And if you have any questions or just want to consult with us on something, we're happy to help. So any last minute questions before we say goodbye? I'll leave the chat open for you all. Anita, you're most welcome. We're so glad that you were here with us this morning. All right. Well, that's my time this morning, as they say in the comedy business. So thank you, everyone. I hope you have a good rest of your Tuesday and a great rest of your week. Well, we appreciate your time this morning. Take care.